Olympic values were respected and observed, wouldn't you?
Our goal is to inspire and enable people to adopt an active, healthy, and fulfilling lifestyle.
Team sports allow us to talk about life skills.
The Olympic Games in sport sees itself as a promoter of human rights.
Mr. Bailey, how are you doing?
I am strong. And yourself?
I'm doing very well. Where are you joining us from? South Africa?
Yes, from South Africa. I'm in Cape Town at this moment. We are locked down. We're level 3.
You know, it just goes to show how global this entire webinar has been. There's a reason why it's called the international webinar. We have people joining us from South Africa, Pakistan, Germany, Costa Rica, Croatia, Australia, and I'm pretty sure there are lots of other countries that I haven't that I can't quite remember right now. But glad to have you on our One Play Sports Network. So I am sure you have an exciting session lined up for us. So you can introduce who the speaker will be, as well as give the viewers an idea about what the topic is that will be discussed for this session over the course of the next 50 minutes or so. Okay,
thank you. And thank you once again for the opportunity. And this really shows that the world is not so vast. It's a small world that we're in, that we can connect like this. I'm going to introduce to you the speaker that's going to present. Her name is Nadia Moreno. She's currently working as a senior program officer for child and youth development at Children International. Nadia will spend some time in the presentation, especially in the introduction, of more what Children International is all about. And they focus on 4 pillars. And I think that the pillars is something that we all need to pay attention to. 1 deals with the health, 2 the education, 3 empowerment, and 4 employment. Nadia will expand on the empowerment part and especially her role that she plays in that. And all of this is geared towards bringing children out of poverty, out of the cycle of poverty, and get them into the mainstream and make them employable. And I will summarize in the end as to how we bring that into COVID also, and the impact and effect of COVID onto the program that Nadia is going to speak about, and more especially football being the sport of the poor and how it hits the poor. And when you look at also the Children International, which is working for, and the countries that they're in, and it's really in some of the poorest countries. We look at the Latin America and the Caribbeans also. And there's also in Africa, and I think it's Zambia. Before joining Children International, Nadia led the Agrana program at Partners of the Americas, and that was based in Washington, D.C., which utilizes soccer. Nadia, it's football. It's only in America where they refer to soccer. Team to help their youth at risk between the ages of 18 to 24. And if you look at that, that is really where youth move from the one level to the other, and that is so important if we do not catch them at that level. And Nadia's work speak to that. And that is for them to find a job, go back to school, or start their own businesses. She also worked with Soccer in Streets, that's in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Foundation Funding in Bogota, Colombia. She has extensive experience in using sport as a tool for social change. Currently, Nadia is based in London. She holds a master's degree in sport for social coexistence in conflict resolution, and received an undergraduate degree in political science and sociology from Emory University. Nadia is a firm believer in the power of sport to change lives. And I must say, Nadia, that is what our founding father of South Africa also preached, Nelson Mandela, that sport has the power to change the world. So I present to you Nadia Moreno.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bailey, for that wonderful introduction. And I agree with you, it's football, not soccer. So I am so honored to be here today. A special thanks to the Olympic Education Committee, the Indian Olympic Association. I am so happy to be a part of the international webinar on Olympism, Olympic movement, and Olympic education that's taking place this week. As Mr. Bailey said, thank you all for being here in this important time. I am going to speak a bit about our Sport for Development work and give you some examples of what Children International has been doing in times of COVID, but not just COVID. Our world is going through a lot of injustice right now, and it's really a time for us to come together with solutions that can have a positive impact on the lives of the children we serve. So I'm going to share my screen and walk through my presentation. So first and foremost, I would like to cover these key points today in the presentation. The first is a short background on Children International and the work that we've been doing and currently do across 10 different countries in the world. I'd like to focus on our empowerment programs with a specific lens at the Sport for Development work, the focus and approach, and share with you all some of the results that we've seen to date. I'd also like to share some challenges and recommendations, as well as an example of the activities that we've been sharing with the different countries and implementing community centers that we have across the globe that we're currently doing for resiliency right now. And of course, leaving the last few minutes for questions or comments that you all might have. Really excited to hear those as well. So Children International has been around for quite some time, over 80 years. And right now, our main focus is bringing people together to end poverty for good. And we're currently operating in 10 countries through 13 different field locations or community centers. And we're working with over 250,000 youth and children. You can see the countries listed here as was shared by Mr. Bailey. We have different locations in the US. We're operating in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia as well. So the way our centers operate is we have our headquarters in Kansas City. Children International is based in Kansas City, Missouri, in the middle of the US, it's the Midwest. And in the field locations that you saw listed on the map, also listed here in this yellow box. And at each location, we have a central office that also works in conjunction with different community centers in different neighborhoods. So that's a bit on the structure. We have, again, different types of community centers with the focus that these are safe spaces for children, youth, and families to come together to receive different services or programming. Our program focuses, or our framework, the vision and the focus of any program that we do at Children International falls under 4 key categories. The first category has to do with health. So really focusing on healthy behaviors and using health services. So that's the first pillar. And things like healthy behaviors include hand washing programs, dental hygiene, different types of behaviors that can have a long-term impact on the day-to-day life of children and youth. The second pillar that we focus on at Children International is education. We know the importance of education in and out of the classroom. And in our education programs, we have a lot of tutoring and scholarships that are given so that youth can continue to break the barriers that prevent them from attaining an education, and also the support they might need in math and literacy to really enhance and improve the day-to-day that they do in the classroom. The fourth pillar, which is a lot of the work that I'll speak to today and that the team members who are working in Sport for Development fall under, is empowerment. Empowerment for us is someone's ability to have a positive outcome in whatever decision they decide to pursue. And we focus on different life skills under empowerment, things like decision-making, problem-solving, coping with stress and emotion, learning how to work in a team, teamwork, empathy. All of these life skills fall under empowerment, which is why our Sport for Development programs fall here. Because we know sport not just football, but any sport or game, really allow us to teach life skills and to practice life skills. And our last pillar, the fourth pillar, is employment. Employment is so important when we're working with trying to have a goal of breaking free from poverty or advancing in terms of just a positive impact as youth age and as they grow and become productive members of society. So our employment programs are essential. And of course, they're working with our older young adult age group of youth. And these programs really hone in on skills that we need in the workforce, resume building, interview skills and prep, so that youth have that opportunity to enter the workforce and be productive members of society. So I wanted to start with this kind of framework in mind. Again, we'll be digging into sport for development, the power of sport that falls onto empowered, but knowing that all of these pillars are really key in positive impact in communities. So digging into a little deeper of the life skills, I know I shared a couple before, but for any work that we're doing in sport for development, we're really focusing in on these life skills that you see listed here. They're broken up into two different categories. One category is focusing on more individual skills that I have to practice and enact. The other category, also skills that we need to enact, but they perhaps involve others. So we consider them more social responsibility skills because they're about interaction. So you'll see, for example, things like critical thinking, creative thinking listed on the life skills, and then things like valuing group work, caring for community, appreciating diversity, listed under social responsibility. And in empowerment, we're also measuring or analyzing, providing monitoring and evaluation for three core things. So the first is voice. Do youth feel that they have a voice and opinion? And a lot of that comes from the work in these life skills. The second is, do they have an opportunity to really practice those life skills and showcase them? The third is participation. Now that they have those voices, those opinions, those opportunities, are they going that extra step and actively participating in things in their community, in their families, in their school? So those three key ingredients are things we're looking at to determine if that youth or child is empowered, right? We think it's a mixture of these three and all revolving around the importance of these life skills. So why are we using sport? We believe, like many in the sport for development sector, community, that there are really about 2 or maybe 4 different categories that we can use to classify sport. So when we look at the approach at Children International, so there might be more different ways that we can classify how we're using sport, but for Children International, we're looking at sport as a right and sport as a tool. So when I say sport as a right, it's really, we know that sport and play are fundamental human rights. And as an entity who's working in communities, we really want to focus on upholding human rights. So any of sport for development work really focuses on enhancing and improving and making sure we have access to this fundamental right. The second, which is our main focus in the curriculums we use and the activities we use, is sport as a tool. So sport as a hook to engage their interest, to engage excitement, and really use that energy from sport to talk about those life skills that I shared before. So sport and competitions are important, but they're used as a channel or as a vehicle to talk about the life skills. So in our case, we're not doing sport just to develop an athlete or a player. We're using sport to develop these life skills. So that's just something I really also wanted to clarify. As we talk about sport for development, we know there's other categories. Sport as a platform, where we see in different sporting events, maybe players coming out with signs, especially in today's climate, so important, you know, the anti-racism signs. That type of platform also exists in sport. And I'm sure there's others. And for CI, it's really these two approaches that we're focusing in on. I also want to reiterate, and so timely with the webinar that we're currently on, according to Principle 5 of the Olympic Letter that the International Olympic Committee proposes, it's really restating this human right to practice sport. You know, each individual must have the opportunity to practice sports without discrimination of any kind and in the Olympic spirit, which requires mutual understanding in a spirit of friendship, solidarity, and fair play. Also, Article 31 of the United Nations Convention about the Right of the Child really reiterate this point of every child has the right to leisure, recreation, and cultural activities. All children have the right to relax and play and join in a wide range of activities. So those two principles for me from the Olympic Letter and from the United Nations Convention on Rights of the Child are very important and serve as that north guiding star in a lot of the work we're doing in sport for development. The approach that we use, definitely having sport and play-based activities, especially in this area of technology taking over. We realize that sport is a healthy way to get youth to interact, to exercise their body, and play really helping with building creativity. So we know that difference in that sport has more organized rules and structure and coaches and different procedures, whereas play for us is more open. The youth is in charge of creating those rules, creating that game, and really being creative in the process, developing their ability for critical and creative thinking. Our approach also includes reflections, having facilitator or coaches after a sport activity have a conversation and a dialogue about what took place, how did it feel for that participant, what did they learn, how can they apply some of what happened on the field to their home, to their school, to their community. Our approach also in terms of duration and frequency varies drastically. In some cases, we have programs that take place after school. So those programs are a lot shorter in duration. Some sessions can be from 30 minutes to an hour. And frequency also varies. It could be the first half of the school year or the full school year in the cases, for example, in Little Rock, Arkansas in the US, where we work with multiple schools, mainly middle or high schools. In different countries, we operate more on a quarterly cycle, where the programs will last a quarter with youth coming in every Saturday for 2 hours. So the duration and frequency really varies depending on the availability of our youth and the spaces that we have, and of course on the team members that are leading these interactive sport and play-based activities. Now, you will never see an activity that's a full 90-minute football match. You'll never see a full sport regulated activity or rules. All of our sport is modified sport, right? So it'll be shorter amount of time, even different rules to allow us to really get to that focus, which is life skills. So one of my favorite activities is one where youth are holding hands and playing an actual football match. And this is wonderful because you physically have to talk about teamwork with someone. And if someone's a lot faster or slower than you, then you have to deal with that feeling and talk about it and come together with solutions. So that type of activity is what we're doing when we say sport and play-based activities. This graphic here is also critical for us. Our facilitators and coaches are part of the process of sharing knowledge, beliefs, and experiences. We do not see it as one coach or facilitator knows the right answers or the right way to process some of these life skills. We know that the facilitator can ask key questions to engage in that conversation in the group, and that everybody in the group brings different beliefs, knowledge, and experiences. That's what makes the reflection dialogues so rich and so essential in talking about these life skills. So now I want to share a bit, now that I've talked about what we mean by sport for development, what the life skills are, what the focus is, and the approach that we're using, I'd like to share some of the results. And our results, as I said, are measured by different assessments. We're using something called a CAP, which measures knowledge, attitudes, and practices. And it's a self-assessment that youth will complete before the program and when the program concludes. And that allows us to see changes in pre and post. So the data that I'm sharing with you here comes from CAPs that participants in Sport for Development programs have filled out. So in 2019, we had 18,887 participants enrolled. And of those 18,887, we had about 18,042 children and youth complete the program. So we do see some dropouts, and those can happen for any reason. Families move, maybe children are no longer interested in the program. We do have a percentage of dropouts here. And I'd like to share that 49% of all of our participants were female, which is very exciting because we know a lot of barriers with sport tend to have gender norms and stigmas that are associated with playing sport or participating in sport-based activities. And many of our cultures across the world tend to associate sports with males. So this was very exciting to see that we have almost half of our participants are females who are engaging in sport-based activities and play. 42% globally of all of the countries, again, the 10 countries that implement our program, we had a 42% improvement on coping with emotions and stress, which is a core life skill so needed in sport, but also in the landscape of today's reality. We had 85% report a caring climate, and 33% improved from pre to post on this. And the way we define these life skills are by the World Health Organization and the United Nations core life skills. Another interesting result is that we tested a new curriculum, which was designed with input from experienced facilitators and teammates in our Children International headquarters. And we were able to come together with a very simple curriculum that allowed for contextualization and that allowed for the creativity of the facilitator. So it had, the key theme, the activity, key questions that can be asked during the reflection, but the facilitator still had the flexibility to, arrange the order, to contextualize. If perhaps a slide had a photo of Cristiano Ronaldo, a wonderful athlete and football player, but in other countries that might not be the preferable sport or athlete, maybe there's youth who don't know who that is, then the facilitator has the ability to contextualize, to change that image to a different athlete or a different sport that's more relevant and that speaks to our youth. So now I'd like to share some key recommendations from the work that we've been doing in Sport for Development. The first is making sure we have a safe place where participants can learn. Safety is so important when we think of sport. The youth are physically engaging, they're active, so we want to make sure that the space is safe and emotionally we're open, we're inclusive, and we're promoting healthy dialogues and healthy behaviors. The second is making sure we're always able to focus on a life skill rather than who is the best athlete or the best player. For our work and our focus being sport for development, sport for life skills, this is an essential piece and an essential recommendation to really make it about that life skill. And maybe we congratulate that athlete who showed empathy and who showed teamwork over the athlete who scored the goal. Because at the end of the day, we really want to focus in on these life skills. The last three recommendations, the first has to do with rules and reflections. I think I shared a little bit earlier how changing the rules and modifying the activities is really key to achieving the outcome that we hope, which is increased life skills. Enjoyment. Time and time again, we realize that every time we work with youth, sometimes we try to complicate and make the activity even more packed. So having fun and activities being just a space for fun for youth is so, so critical. And making sure that we have youth input in some of these activities. Maybe I think this activity is very fun, but a youth will tell me, actually, that sounds quite boring and it's quite long. I'd like to change it. So being open and focusing around fun and enjoyment is really important in your sport for development work. Sense of identity. We know that anytime we put on the jersey of our favorite team, of our favorite player, we feel a part of that sport or of that athlete or of that game. So youth see that as well in our programming. So making sure the equipment, the materials we're using is allowing a positive image, a positive sense of identity for that group of youth and children who are participating. Many times communities see those youth on the field just sitting around or assume a negative stigma. It's important for us in the community to build that positive sense of identity, and sport allows us to do that. So I'd like to close my presentation with showing you an example of materials that we've shared during this COVID pandemic. This material is shared with our facilitators, with our coaches, with our teammates, and then they replicate either on a virtual platform, which is the majority of the work that's taking place now due to COVID, through virtual channels like we're doing today, through a webinar, through Facebook Live, through WhatsApp, or in the cases where they're perhaps dropping off workbooks, curriculums, worksheets. So I'll go through this quickly. It's just equipping our facilitators and our coaches. What is resilience? We're trying to talk about resilience in difficult time. Resilience is one's ability to adapt to changes without losing our emotional stability. We know that sport and play release endorphins in the brain, which provide an outlet for expression and promote coexistence and creativity. We talk a little bit about trauma. We know that right now the world is going through a traumatic experience. Trauma is a deeply distressing event, experience, and/or effect. And in the case of COVID-19, we are all experiencing a public community trauma, which includes it's a shared experience. So there's a lack of judgment. There is a sense of helplessness. It's a force beyond control, and it's a sense of loss, right? And unfortunately, we know this has taken far too many lives of loved ones, and maybe by now there's family members and friends who know of someone who has had it or knows someone who has lost someone. So again, reminding the facilitator and the coaches on why sport here, reminding those key tips. We can use sport to promote a healing, safe environment. We can enhance emotional well-being and life skills. And it's an opportunity to learn and talk about life skills. So here's an example of key questions that we would ask youth depending on their age. So for example, youth 4 to 7-year-olds, maybe we're just asking, who are you? What is your name? What's your role in your family? And that's how we start talking about self-awareness and roles and responsibilities. Or we ask things like, how do you feel? Where do you feel it in your body? And that's allowing us to talk about identifying emotions. And especially during a pandemic, we know there's a ton of different emotions that are happening. Many of them, the majority of them, fear-based emotions, which are important for youth to share and learn how to cope through. For youth who are perhaps a little older, 7 through 12 years old, we might ask questions instead of just what are you feeling? Now we might dig a little deeper and ask, so you feel like that, what does that mean? How do you interpret that experience? So that we're digging a bit deeper. And for youth 12 years old and plus, we're asking questions like, tell me about a problem that you have and how have you coped with it? Questions that really are gauging the situation, but also allowing that youth to think through a plan, a goal, some way to overcome it. So here are some very simple activities when, for example, youth or children share they're feeling sad or angry, and we want to, provide that support and reflect. We can recommend do a physical activity, hug a pillow, practice deep breathing, watch a funny video, draw a picture. Very easy. And I know some of this sounds very basic, but a lot of our children and youth in this time are not receiving some of these key tips that they can use. Maybe they're on their own, or maybe they're afraid to share their feelings, or they see that their family members are also sad and angry. They don't want to add to that. So here are just some very simple recommendations. Again, you'll see sport, singing, dancing, things that, really embody youth playing a local game or creating a game on their own. Very, very simple tips that we can do in these difficult times. And of course, really wrapping it all back to resilience and how emotions are playing a role right now. And we really need to try to cope and learn how to deal with our emotions, and just doing something we enjoy. In difficult times, exercise, movement, increasing our different fitness levels can really decrease stress. And it's important to just start. We pick an activity and we do it. And sharing some of these activities with children and youth can allow them to really enter this realm of moving and finding new experiences. So that is my presentation for today. Thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for listening. And I look forward to hearing any comments or questions you might have. I will stop sharing my screen now. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Nadia. Thank you for the in-depth presentation. It's quite brilliant, as it was very informative. You've raised the important point is that sport as a right, that everybody should have the right to exercise sport, and how do you use sport as a tool to bring about social change. And thank you for bringing that out. And like you said, Children's International is the organization peddling it, and I think that is quite good. You've also addressed the access to a right, and which we should promote, and you've highlighted the vulnerable group between 18 to 24, but you've also gone down a little bit down where you talk to the younger ones to get them also into a healthy lifestyle, and also that they get onto the right path. What was also important for the participants to note is the emphasis not on formal sport, but to bring about that and bring messaging in, but is the modified part. And young people find it quite exciting, and they can really touch and look forward to if it's something different. But if it is just a normal sport program, it's very difficult for them to find and to touch it. Okay? And with modified sport also, you will get fun and enjoyment, because it's something new and children love to experiment. And this is the vehicle to do that. And just to summarize or to conclude, the last part is that you've emphasized right throughout the program the importance of development to develop the young person into becoming a human being and to feel wanted in society. And the vehicle for that is sport. Thank you very much for highlighting that. It is open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. That was great.
Thanks.
Yeah. Mr. Bailey, do you have any questions personally? In case you have any questions personally, you can put those forth and I'll look at the comments that are coming in from the viewers and see if there are any questions for Mrs. Moreno in the comment section.
Yes, the question I wanted to ask is that because the countries which your program is, I found that most of them, because I'm in football, by the way, I'm serving on our national executive of football in South Africa.
Okay.
So I do have that bias towards it. I'm wearing my top, by the way.
Awesome, wonderful.
I wanted to ask that because in all those countries, football is very strong. Did you have any challenges to try and introduce any other modified sport? For example, hockey, badminton, the other sporting codes, which is very far for young people, and especially in the impoverished areas to touch.
Absolutely. That's an excellent question, Mr. Bailey. And yes, it's we focus on team sports. So while I've said football a lot, and that's my personal favorite.
Sorry, Nadia, sorry to interrupt. Can you just expand? Because I picked that up. The emphasis is on team sport. Why team sport?
Yes, so team sports, that is the priority. And that is because team sports allow us to talk about life skills. And everything we're doing is going back to that development, that building the youth, building the child with life skills that allow them to make positive decisions in their home, in their school, in their community. So we notice that with individual sports, while they are important, they channel different life skills that aren't the focus of our work right now. So individual sports have their place, and they, of course, touch on things like more rigorous discipline just individually versus team sports. It's a discipline with a team. It's the end game is the collective, the community. And that's what we want to work around, appreciating and valuing group work. We are not preaching that everything happens because of one individual. And team sports, what I've seen in the communities that we work in, I've seen a lot of basketball, I've seen volleyball, I've seen netball. We have some teams who are even now experiencing with ping pong, which is more individual and less amount of youth and play. But again, so many powerful lessons to pull from that. And to be very honest, Mr. Bailey, I do think that football and sports that are so global now have also entered into a place where they are so global that maybe youth are not as attracted to that sport that much right now. The way that's especially competing against others in it has some tension. Because there are these, the passion that arises with football. And we know that sport does have some elements that if they're not channeled properly can lead to negative stigma and stereotypes. So we encourage anybody who is implementing sport for development to really pick more neutral sports that are not as charged, but that allow us to, again, have fun, talk about the life skills and practice them in action. We even have some activities where it's a mixture. It's a combination sport where the first half they can use their feet like a football game, but the second half they have to use their hands like a basketball game. And so that has morphed. And that's what the unique value of modified activities or sport-based activities allow us to do.
Okay, thank you. That's good. Just the next question, if there are no questions yet, this the next question. Is that some of the recommendations you put forward is when you deal with the exercises and to deal with trauma, etc., is hug a pillow. Now, normally young boys would feel very macho, and they because they might see that as being quite to be like a girl, and they and within their nature they want to be macho and not to be identified to be weak. Did you find any difficulties with that, or what's your experience with that?
We have found a lot of challenges and difficulties with that, Mr. Bailey. And we do notice, especially at the beginning of our programs, that exists. There is more of, I'm a boy, I'm a girl, I don't want to hold hands with her in this activity, I'm better, I'm faster. But as we go through these life skills, it's really great to see that camaraderie and that teamwork. It almost happens organically, that the more that we interact and we have fun together, and we realize that the purpose here is not winning. It's not that I'm the fastest, it's we need everybody on the team to win. There's a lot of activities that also include every player must touch the ball before you can score. So that also changes the way the mentality of I'm better, I'm faster, I can win. It's I can't even win unless I work with each of my teammates. So that does exist, these challenges, and we try to break those barriers and that mentality as we go through the program. I shared that the frequency and the duration changes, but maybe there's a group that we notice at the beginning has a lot of gender stereotypes and barriers. So we would need to really hone in and talk about those. And it's really on our facilitators and our coaches to create safe spaces, to have that dialogue, share those feelings, and work through them. We really try to keep that open mind of we are one team and we all are the same. We need to work together in order to reach a positive impact.
Okay. I just also need to say that the work that you're doing is exactly what Pierre de Coubertin wanted to do right at the outset, when he said that he does not want to have kids as robots. He wants human beings, them to understand the importance of sport and education. So what this program is doing is speaking directly to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Mr. Bailey and Ms. Moreno, so there are a few questions that have come in from the audience members. Firstly, there have been lots of comments that have come in, people saying that the presentation has been extremely informative, very nice, knowledge-based information. This session was extremely informative, but there are a few questions as well, which I'd like to pick out, a few very interesting ones and thought-provoking ones. Of course, we're now seeing the resumption of activity on the sporting field in many countries. The Premier League is going to be back on the 17th of June. The La Liga, I think, played its first game yesterday. Sevilla played against Real Betis, I believe. And so people asking lots of questions with regard to how sports persons can actually adapt themselves in these very testing times. So the first question is from Daisy Marwa, and she's asking us, does wearing a face mask affect the performance of athletes? I know there's been a fair bit of debate as well with regard to runners or people jogging wearing face masks and whether it's safe for them because it might restrict the oxygen intake while they're running. So would love your thoughts and views on this contentious topic.
I might let Mr. Bailey answer that. That's not my area, especially since in our work team, we are not focused on performance. So there's no activity at Children International that a youth has to perform or run in a certain amount of time. We're not focused on performance. But my personal opinion on face masks is that in this time of a pandemic, they are important and they can help in preventing the spread of the coronavirus. But I'm not an expert in sport and performance, so I'll allow Mr. Bailey to answer that. Thank you for that question.
Yes, Nadia, I'm even worse in this. I'm an accountant.
So I'm sure the community.
Yes, but the point I want to make is that if that's the rule in each and every country, that you must wear face mask at all times. In South Africa, it's a must. It's a rule. It's a law. So if you ask me that question in South Africa, I will say, yes, you must wear your face mask.
Absolutely. And in many ways, I think what you just mentioned exemplifies what the topic of discussion has been over the past 40 or so minutes. In many ways, sport is a teacher of life. You see managers, players who spend, say, the first 25 or 30 years of their career on the sporting field, and they just learn so much about life, so much so that, once the career ends, it's almost a rude shock to them because a big part of their life has now been taken away from them, and they feel this massive void, which is why it can be very hard for a lot of players to actually adjust to retirement, only because they've never been used to being away from the limelight, and so they miss the adrenaline that they used to get as sports persons, playing for the clubs, their countries, week in and week out in front of 60,000, 70,000 people every single day on live television.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. Yes. Just also that I think that in this time, And for the mere fact, if you go also into the history of the Olympic Games, it was only, although it is recorded that it was only cancelled twice because of the world wars, it just shows that the seriousness of this pandemic, that the
Right.
Olympic Games had to be moved. And the Olympic Games is not an event to be moved at all. Us who are purists in the Olympic movement feels that if it's the time that it's scheduled, it must take place. But it shows that how serious this pandemic is to be moved now to 2021. And I think that the last time the Olympic Games was moved is 1906, when they weren't sure that if the next host would be able to host it, and it was moved to 1906. It was supposed to be in 1908 to London. So it really shows that the seriousness and the thought processes that went into this. And by doing that, when the Olympic Games was moved, it really sent a strong message to the world. Take note, this pandemic is not something to play with.
Right.
Absolutely. Well said, Mr. Bailey. A couple of questions that we'd love to tackle coming in from the audience. So we have Pooja here, who's asking us, which life skills development would you specifically suggest within individual sport? You know, we talked about how
Yeah.
nature of life. So what's the life skills that we can actually develop and cultivate as a result of playing sport?
That's a wonderful question. Thank you, Pooja. I always encourage teams to focus on self-awareness. I think self-awareness really allows us to have that space for a student, a participant, an athlete to really reflect on who they are. And with self-awareness, we're talking about, you know, our beliefs, our goals, the way we kind of view the world, and roles and responsibilities fall into self-awareness. So I think that's definitely one that I would recommend starting at. I think also the concept of how we cope with stress and emotions. That is fundamental in an individual or in a team sport. And the reason why coping with stress and emotions is so relevant is because you can only imagine in a very intense activity, whether it be sport-based or an actual sporting match or game, how those emotions can change so drastically. We've seen, you know, team members celebrate a goal or a point or a win, and we see when they lose how they react, right? So sport has really triggers that happen throughout a match, throughout a game, even throughout an activities where emotions really fluctuate. So the life skill on being able to cope, manage, and handle your emotions is essential. Now imagine that skill if we're able to build it on the pitch, on the court, and how that transfers to that person's home. Now, when they see maybe their spouse or their child do something that upsets them or makes them happy, there's a way that they can manage those emotions. And now more than ever, Pooja, in the world, we need to all be able to manage and cope with our stress and emotions. We're dealing with a pandemic, we're dealing with unprecedented injustice and racism in the world, where everybody on all sides needs to, and for me, there is not a side. I'm very anti-racism, Black Lives Matter. All lives really need to come together for equality and for justice. And managing our stress and emotion plays a critical role in tackling social issues and tackling issues in our homes, in our schools, in our communities. So that was a long answer, Pooja, for your wonderful question, but I would really work on self-awareness and coping with emotions and stress and how we manage our emotions.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And I'm not sure, again, if the next question that I have in mind is actually something that's relevant to you, something that you might be able to talk about, but I'm pretty sure you have your personal opinions, if not your expert opinions here. But Namita Seni is asking us, what are some of the preventive measures that can be adopted while practicing sports, given the testing times and given the constraints that we're facing right now as a result of COVID-19?
Great, that's a wonderful question. So at our community centers right now, we are not doing face-to-face interactions due to some of the restrictions in the communities. So we've done a lot of virtual videos that have activities that kids would or youth would do in person. So a preventative measure could be sending that activity or that practice virtually or through text and having participants do those at home. So that's a practice that we're using, to prevent large groups of people coming together. And I think as things start to reopen, there will be key steps that, governments will share and different entities, things like checking temperature, things like having, soap and antibacterial spray and gloves, or, having different spaces marked off. Maybe our practices will have different cones where people can't be, closer than those cones. I think we'll see more of that. However, our teams right now are still just keeping things virtual and sending messages versus coming together in person yet.
Yes, no, you're quite correct, because to beat the pandemic, it's about social distancing. And social distancing in itself means that and combat sport is a contact sport. So it will be very difficult to practice that one really in a game situation or a match situation in itself. So this is where social distancing is applied. And Nadia is quite correct by saying that there are various protocols and steps in our country. We have it from level 5 to level 1, which means that contact sport, and of which combat sport is one, will only be allowed to start practicing at level 1. Because then the pandemic would have been controlled to a large extent, and the curve would have been flattened and would have taken a downward spiral by that time. And I think that this is also the time where training, where coaches now use the virtual and the digital platforms really to train the athletes and prepare them really for let's call it for battle, because this is combat sport.
Absolutely. And the next topic that I have in mind, and there's some viewers who are asking us questions on this topic, it's not directly related to the topic of conversation, but it's still a very, very pertinent issue. We, of course, talked about, how the mind and the body are interconnected. Both the mind and the body go hand in hand. You talk about physical fitness as well as mental fitness, right? Now, given the fact that a lot of the games now will be taking place behind closed doors, right? So that 12th man, which is the fans, they're going to be missing, right? So psychologically, that will definitely affect the performance of the players. They won't be used to the same noise, the same positive type of chaos that they experience every time. So there won't be the 12th man to cheer them on. So how exactly can they cope with this? Of course, some people are calling it the new normal. So maybe it's just a matter of time before they get used to the fact that they're playing behind closed doors. But how do you think they'll take to it, or perhaps not be able to take to it during the initial few days at least?
I'll let Mr. Bailey handle that one. That's going to be an interesting thing to learn what that looks like.
It's going to be very difficult, let me tell you. And I want to draw the experience of the 1995 World Cup, which South Africa won in rugby. And everybody said, when the Springbok team took to the field, it was not the 15 men who took to the field, but it was the 46,000 people in the stadium who took to the field also. And New Zealand, being the champions by that time, they were mesmerized, because they were playing against the country now. And the worst part was that when the game started, Nelson Mandela walked onto the field. So they felt even further disarmed. And when the game was about to start, a Boeing 747 flew over the stadium. So the whole country was behind South Africa, and we won the World Cup. From underdogs, we became the world champions. Now put that in today's situation, behind closed doors. Just imagine behind closed doors. When the games are played at Anfield, that's the slaughterhouse. The last game we played, we were 3-0 down, we won the game 4-3. Okay? So now just imagine, there are no spectators. So that title of being the slaughterhouse, Anfield being the slaughterhouse, would be removed, because now it is the playing field is now literally level. So it will really being the fitness and the team who is psychologically and emotionally strong will become the winners, because they will then play without the 12 men on the field.
Absolutely. And Miss Moreno, I'm pretty sure even if I look at Atletico Madrid, right, they play at the Wanda Metropolitano, which of course can be a very intimidating atmosphere for the team that's visiting. So having that element that's missing can perhaps negatively impact the team. But as Mr. Bailey pointed out, it will be a level playing field. So it's not just that one team will be affected. I'm guessing every single team will be affected in a similar manner.
I agree, and I think it'll actually promote more teamwork. I think we're going to see teams that are less individualistic and more coming together. So it's going to be an exciting time, and I agree with Mr. Bailey. Let's see what happens, and excited to see that.
Absolutely. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure you guys must have come across this, but in the Bundesliga in Germany, as well as I think in certain parts in Japan, so in the Japanese league, instead of course, having real people in the crowd, they have these cardboard cutouts, these drum playing robots, mannequins, which try to emulate the noise that you actually get from the crowd. So I'm not sure if that might help. Not quite the perfect substitute, but maybe helps a bit more than seeing empty seats. What do you reckon?
That's interesting. We're gonna have to see that.
It is the crowd, really. The noise makes a difference. If there's a thunderous applause, it spurs players on to even go beyond themselves. Now you can have someone sitting quietly. They might play some music. It's not going to be the normal game. But you must also remember, this is about compliance, where people want to comply. They want to complete the league so that they can also know who is promoted or who's relegated and who will get the millions of rands. And also so the transfers take place. And I think that this is also where television plays a big role, because they fund all these programs or all those leagues. And that is where the pressure is. It's about revenue, and it looks like in most instances that overshadows lives. And like we say that in most of the countries, lives matter more than livelihoods.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You summed it up beautifully, and not just in football. If I could perhaps take a slight detour right now, I'm a big cricket fan. Cricket's a religion in India, which is not a surprise. But we have certain cricket stadiums in India that can actually house 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 people. I belong to the city of Calcutta. This is where I am, and we have the iconic Eden Gardens, which is the mecca of cricket in many ways, at least the mecca of cricket in India. And it used to have a capacity of 1 lakh, so 100,000. Now the capacity has dropped down a bit ever since there was some renovation work being done, but it's still a good 70,000, which is a solid number. And I honestly cannot believe how dull the atmosphere might be without 70,000 fans, without the stadium being packed to the rafters. But of course, we totally understand that safety comes first. And while this might be it might not be as much fun for viewers who might not be able to visit the stadium, of course, it's in the best interest of the public safety, and we can hope that sooner rather than later we're all safe to actually visit the stadiums and be with each other again.
Absolutely. I really agree with that. Our livelihood and people's lives are really important, and they're at risk right now for, if we don't practice social distancing, we're at risk. We're putting each other at risk. So there's no need to do that. And we need to work through this pandemic so that we can get to a place where we're all safe and we can all then enjoy these important moments and cherish them in a different way. I think the level of empathy and enjoyment also, when we get back to being able to hug our friends and family, to be able to go to that family dinner all together, or to go to that match and be all together, it's going to be a really beautiful moment. And in order to get there, we have to take these precautions that the World Health Organization, that all of our doctors and scientists are working hard and telling us about. And we have to trust them and really, really follow those practices.
I agree.
And Miss Moreno, you spoke about, hugging friends and family members in person, but till the time we can actually do that, I'm pretty sure we can virtually We can virtually hug each other.
Yeah, we can, guys. Big virtual hug. Janet, James.
It's like it's that fellow one.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Fantastic thoughts. I think this comment from Michael Chua here, sums up what we've been discussing over the course of the last 10 or 15 minutes. And Michael Chua says, when we cheer at home, it translates to sounds into the stadium.
Yes, Michael.
So
Let's keep cheering at home.
So let's just make sure, as Ms. Moreno pointed out, we're loud and clear, supporting our respective teams from home. Fantastic. Mr. Bailey and Ms. Moreno, this was an absolutely fantastic session. Thank you so much again for your time. And you could clearly tell from some of the reactions and the comments and the questions that came in, the viewers found it extremely fascinating and rewarding for them. So much appreciate your time on One Play Sports Networks again.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us. Really grateful for everyone. Thank you.
Yes, just from my side also, Nadia, thank you very much for a brilliant presentation. It is these life lessons that you've given. It is something that must be shared. It must be really shared. And as a person who studies Olympism, it hits to the very foundation of what Olympism is all about. It's not about winning, but it's about participation. And your presentation speaks to the core of those values about building international friendship. And that is what Olympic Games used to be called, the Friendship Games. And and you must really try with your organization, your NGO, that this message is spread further than the countries that you're in now, because it will really help to spread the gospel of Olympism to the rest of the world. And then to the organizers, I also want to thank you for this opportunity. It was great, not only for me to experience the digital platform so widely, as you can see at my age, we are struggling. But thank you very much for the opportunity and to share some ideas with the rest of the participants. Thank you very much.
Yes, so grateful. Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Okay.
Thank you to everyone who's hosting this.